Welcome, everybody. My name is Jamel Saladin. This is Society Past, Present, and Future, and what I'm doing is a new series on how your pastor lied to you and why. Now, before anyone is offended, because those words just kind of feel like they trigger some people, my intentions today is not to trigger anybody. In fact, I would like to think I'm a sociologist, and the only reason for that is because I majored in social studies and for my bachelor's. So, and I really do enjoy that topic. So I'm not doing anything as in with malice, or I don't have any malicious intent. I don't have a religion to replace with whatever we're knocking down. So I'm not knocking it down on purpose. To be totally transparent with you, I've seen some things that weren't transparent, some things that just didn't, they come across almost as lies, but also just the truth that we hold back. And my thing is this: if you didn't tell the people, how would they know, right? So I feel, you know what? Let me tell the people, and then if they still choose whatever they choose, then that's on them. Now, one of the things that I don't think pastors chose to tell the congregation, and guess what? I don't know if I can use that word chose, because maybe the pastors didn't know, or the pastors didn't care, because this is the church business. And if people are coming here, then they're coming here for a specific reason. And why should I tell them something that is contrary to why they're coming here? They're coming, they're enjoying themselves, they're supporting with money, time, effort, all of this other stuff. Am I going to mention things like the documentary hypothesis? What is the documentary hypothesis, and when did that start? Around the 1700s, actually. So it's not anything new. And all it is when certain theologians and scholars started to notice that it seems to be almost more than one author going on. All this information is coming from a totally, not the same source, right? Give me 1 second. Right monitor. There we go. Apologize about that. So that's the first thing I want to talk about in this series. You're going to hear a bunch of different things. And again, let me also say this. I'm doing my videos because I left organized religion, but it wasn't easy to do for a number of different reasons. There was a bunch of questions on whether I was making the right move when I first started. I didn't have all these answers I have today. So today you may see a very confident Jamel. That's because I really had to study, because I wanted to know if I was making the right decision. A friend of mine asked, but how do you know, man? What if Jesus really is going to return, man? You know what I'm saying? And that was his thoughts right there. He was like, yo, I can't take that chance. You understand? Today with confidence, I can say I'm definitely taking a chance, but let me not trigger you. However, I want to help others, because others maybe they not even half. They like at a quarter of a way. Like, yo, I don't know about all this stuff, but there's nobody around them to give them any evidence, any information that they are truths are being withheld from them. Let's just say that. I've been studying quite some time, and I do think I can help somebody to a certain point. So, and sometimes it's not only what you know, it's how you say it, how you deliver it. You understand? So, I'll take a crack at it, and this crack is not to destroy someone's life. It's to crack at helping you liberate yourself, because you may be looking for a reason, but they ain't been giving you a good reason. Like my man said, how do you know that ain't, you know what I'm saying? But if I can articulate some things to you, then I might help you out. Let's just go ahead and start with the documentary hypothesis. and we're going to understand something called J and P. You may hear this when you hear real theologians start talking, right? They start talking about, well, in J and then in P, and then you don't really know what they talking about because you're like, yo, bro, I just go to church. You know what I'm saying? Every now and again, they may ask me to be a deacon or whatever, collect a little offering. They know they could trust me. I'm not stealing nothing anymore. That's you. You very elementary with it. Well, we have to get away from those elementary type of comfortable zones when we're talking about what you believe in. This is what you believe in. So I think you should know a little bit more about what you believe in. Good enough. All right. How did the first books of the Bible come to be? Scholars have long noticed something fascinating beneath the surface of the text. Multiple voices, styles, and traditions woven together into one great narrative. This is the story of the documentary hypothesis. The big idea. Scholars studying the early books of the Bible, particularly Genesis through Deuteronomy, begin noticing something striking. The text doesn't read like a single unified voice. Instead, it shows signs of multiple authors at work across different eras. Different writing styles. Some passages are vivid and narrative. Others are formal and repetitive, suggesting distinct authorial voices. Different names for God. The divine name shifts between Yahweh, Lord, and Elohim, God, sometimes within the same chapter. Now, let's just stop there because I've come across many apologists, right? People who will pretty much come up with any argument to make sense out of what they're saying so that the Bible is not contradicted. But the Bible is contradicted. So, I see these people sweating and working feverishly for no avail. And it is sad. I'm going to say that. It is really sad. You just have to come to the conclusion that you might have been either lied to on purpose or lied to just because your pastor didn't know any better. Maybe he was just a young, fiery pastor on fire for the Lord. You understand? And he didn't do all that seminary business that they're talking about. He just knows God and he's going to get out here and preach the word. And that's fine. You know what I don't think is fine? And we'll go over this later in this. We're going to go over this in several ways during this series, right? I'm going to pull from Paul Wallace. We'll use some of his audio. I'm going to pull from Jordan Maxwell, sorry. Maxwell Jordan sounds like R&B singer who used to play basketball professionally. No, Jordan Maxwell. I'm going to pull from him. But right off the bat, one of the things I started noticing when I started studying was there were certain words in the King James Version of the Bible that wasn't in the Hebrew Bible. I was a grown man before I ever heard anything like the B'nai Elohim. What else is in El Elyon? Did you know Yahweh is not in the King James Version of the Bible? Now, there's always going to be some excuse. They didn't mention Yahweh because it was considered a tetragrammaton, and it was the name Yahweh was too sacred to even speak, thus write down and all of these things. When in fact, there's a lot of things that are not true there. And how are people supposed to make a good decision if they don't have the information? you don't have the same information that's in the Hebrew Bible. Whatever's in the King James Version, right? The edits that were made were crucial edits, critical edits. And I don't know if this was done to keep the people under control, to just keep them following orders within Christianity. They didn't want any questions. Let's keep going. It seems to be working, right? And when I say it seems to be working, everyone wants to be a good Christian. One of the verses that strike me is slaves, obey your master. That doesn't never sit right with me, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent on that, but I know for someone whose Bible that the world has used for so long, King James, and then to find out his brother had heavy investments in slaves, in slave ships. One never knows. That's all I'm saying. Let's get back to this, though, because we got a ways to go. So there were repeated stories. The same events appear twice within different details, a phenomenon scholars called doublets. Now, just stop right here for a second, take a breather, because we didn't really get anywhere yet besides what I'm saying, and we didn't get to J and P yet. Let's just say that. However, I did make a couple of points, so this may be a good time to just take a breather. I don't want anxiety to build up for a lot of people that are struggling, right? So far there's double, and we'll go into some of those in details. So the stories double up, and there's different writing styles. Let's continue on. The J source, the Yahwehist. It's called J because German scholars who pioneered this field spelled Yahweh as Jahweh, which kind of gives us a sense of where the Rastafarians get Jah from. The source J, the J source, is the most immediately recognizable by its vivid, human-centered storytelling. God in J is remarkably personal, not a distant cosmic force, but a being who walks, talks, shapes clay with his hands, and strolls through a garden in the cool of evening. J uses the divine name Yahweh. God is an anthropomorphic who walks, speaks, and interacts directly. Rich, earthly narrative style rooted in early Judean traditions. Classic J passages. God forming Adam from the dust of the ground, Genesis 2. God walking in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 3. The Tower of Babel narrative, which is Genesis 11. The J source feels like storytelling, earthly, intimate, and profoundly human. Versus the P source, which we call the priestly writer. The priestly source stands in striking contrast to J. Where J tells stories, P builds systems. Written from within priestly circles like during or after the Babylonian exile, P is preoccupied with what? Order, legitimacy, and the proper structure of Israel's religious life. Let me just stop right there. There's been countless times at church I would ask not just my pastor, but people that were older than me at the church, and I would say, who wrote the Bible? And one of the easiest cop-outs they could ever reply with was, the Bible was inspired by God. That was a genius response for someone that's not digging a little deeper, and also someone that knew how to have respect for their elders, right? They said something, you knew not to push back, and you keep on going. If you did keep on pushing back, they were just going to tell you it's better not to question God, right? So they would have just guilt tripped you. And if you really wanted to answer, and if you didn't want to see your loved one squirm and squirm, if it was a loved one, right? In my case, it was loved ones. It was family members that I was asking because they had the church. So it was like, yo, who wrote the Bible? And then it was like, oh, the Bible was inspired by God. I don't know what that means today. I don't know if I know what it means by it, but it was almost like, so God, he came down, he wrote those words himself? No, emphatically not. Man wrote those words. Now, I think what we're seeing in J is these same writers who might have been exiled, right? They obviously, they say that the Hebrews were exiled until they were freed eventually by the Persians, and then the Persians allowed them to go to Jerusalem. However, look at this. They were captured by quite a few groups. I think the Assyrians and Babylonians had captured them. So, captured one half and the Babylonians captured the other half. Well, the other two tribes. Nonetheless, they were under another nation's authority for a while until they were released from their grip. While they was there was secret synchronization of civilizations, religions, right? So these people would borrow from other people's religions. They were integrated for hundreds of years. So that means you're losing generations within your own culture, right? People are dying off and new children are being born under another group, another nation. Now, the people are telling you, you're trying to keep your old ways together, but these people are mixing in and blending in, so stories can change. We can see these stories change. However, we would learn years later that much of the Genesis is borrowed from older Mesopotamian cultures like Babylon, Akkad, the Akkadians, Sumerians. We see this. The stories are too similar to be like, well, maybe this could have happened twice. It didn't happen twice, right? Let's just say, take King Sargon being found in a bassinet in the river, and then being brought into royalty's house to be raised. That's King Sargon's story, but it's also Moses' story. So, and then the King Sargon, whether Moses really existed or not, King Sargon existed before the so-called existence of Moses. So, it's stuff like that that we have to take into consideration of when these so-called writers were writing out the Old Testament, or what we call the Hebrew Bible. Classic P passages: the 7-day creation account, Genesis 1, precise, ordered, majestic. Detailed instructions for tabernacle construction in Exodus. The elaborate genealogies of Genesis. P feels institutional and authoritative, the voice of organized religion. And it most likely was. Because I forgot if it was the Sadducees or the Pharisees, but one of them they was like obsessed with what we're talking about now when it comes to how the story would be written compared to the law, right? So some of them, one group was more orally tradition, and others they were way more strict. We have to write this down. It has to be in ordered, and that's why they were always fighting with each other. Let's continue on. Let's see what we got here. J versus P at a glance. The contrast between J and P is one of the most illuminating aspects of the documentary hypothesis. Side by side, their differences reveal two fundamental distant ways of understanding God, religion, and the world. First, you have J, the Yahwehist, divine name Yahweh, which later that name would just be broken down to Lord in the King James Version. So you guys in the King James Version, you don't even get to see the Yahweh. You just see Lord, which brings trouble because Lord is a title, and they use Lord for many different things. So we'll get to that later. God is personal, present, human-like. Style. Vivid narrative, earthly storytelling. Themes: human nature, relationship with gods, and origins. Now that's the Yahwehist. The priestly, so the two different sources of contrast, and here's the P for priestly. The divine name is Elohim instead of Yahweh. God is transcendent, ordered, and sovereign. The style is more formal, repetitive, and systematic. And the themes are law, ritual, genealogy, and sacred order. Two different styles going on, two different textures of writing. So this is why earlier scholars said, you know something, I have a hypothesis about how this whole thing was documented, and I think their points are very valid, and I think you should take a look at these points as well. Why this matters: the documentary hypothesis raises a profound question. If the Bible was composed from multiple sources written at different times by different communities with different agendas, what does that mean for how we read it? Multiple concepts of God. Different sources present a God who is by turns intimate and transcendent, personal and distant, reflecting different theological traditions within ancient Israel. Yeah, but also it's like the old God had a you didn't never know what was going to happen. Sometime if you catch him on a good day, it's like, yo, where you at? Right? He wasn't angered, but when he got angered, it was like, yo, kill everything in sight. Right? Which is in contrast, because if they tell you if Christianity is telling you that Jesus is God, it doesn't seem like this is the same dude. Like, what happened? If this is the same dude just in flesh, he might want to just stay in flesh from now on, because when he wasn't in flesh, he was given all type of commands to murder people, and some of these murders had nothing to do with nothing. There wasn't even. I seen him give an order to murder the people that was in the nation before the nation that they was going to take over. Like, yo, if anybody gets in your way, just murder them. Like, yo, what are you talking about? Different perspectives and agendas. Priestly writers may have had institutional interests. Yahweh authors emphasize human stories. Each source had a community it was speaking to and for. That makes sense. A compiled masterwork. Rather than undermining the text, many scholars argue that recognizing multiple voices reveals the Bible as a rich, layered conversation across centuries of tradition. Yeah. However, let's take in mind that the dogmatic part of religion is fully taking advantage of the psychosis hold it has on the masses. Keep that in mind. And I think once the government gave the church certain exemptions and tax breaks, now they can always come back and ask to use that control to keep the people docile enough not to fight back even to the government. You understand? Just something to think about. In its classic form, the documentary hypothesis identifies four main sources. The four sources, an overview. By the 19th century, scholars, most famously Julius Wellhausen, had refined the theory into four distinct source documents, each with its own theology, style, and historical context. Together, they form the backbone of the Pentateuch as we know it. The first one is the Yahwehist, which uses Yahweh in a vivid narrative storytelling personal God. That's the style it uses. The second one is the Elohist, uses Elohim. So you got J, you got E, right? So now you guys are knowing what these theologians will talk about when they say, well, J, they're talking about the source, they talk about the source style, they talk about the source writer. Then when they say, well, P, right? But let's go into E real quick. E is the Elohist, uses Elohim, and where God speaks through dreams and angels more distant. Then you got D, which is the Deuteronomist, found in Deuteronomy, focused on the law and covenant obedience. Obedience brings blessings, and disobedience brings curses. And there's many people that are going through that today. But I want to say this was inspired by the scribes just to make sure that you guys stay in control. And then last but not least, you have P, which is the priestly. You can see their influence in this style of writing, where it regards more of the rituals, the genealogies, the sacred order, and the institutional structure. I'm trying to keep these videos at a certain length. So what we're going to do, but this is a series, and I did tell you that. We continue with the series because I got all type of audio that's going to come to knock your socks off, right? And really bring this home, really drive this home. So if you did watch this video, hit the like button, share it. If you're not subscribed, do subscribe. More than likely, out the gate, this is going to be a members only. So shout out to all my members, right? But if you somehow watch this and you're like, yo, I want to see the rest of this series, please become a member of the channel. I have a lot of information to give to you, and this is not about just turning you into some type of extremist or walking away from your religion or your God or any of that. That's not what this is about. This is informing you so that you can make a better decision and feel good about your decision. Either way, my name is Jamel Saladin. This is Society, past, present, and future YouTube channel where we focus on all sorts of sociology. That being said, catch you guys later. Peace out.